Well, UBQ, what's amazing about us is that we can actually go into polypropylene, polyethylene, polystyrene, PVC. Those are 4 different families that you cannot work across them, but we can work with all of those and more, actually. We're doing so at a price point that is competitive with the material that we're substituting for. We're not selling for an additional cost for the sustainability benefits, of which there are many.
This episode is all about a company that has pioneered a novel process of converting waste into a unique material that is competing against plastic. Well, it's an interesting story, so stay tuned for the full conversation. Hello and a big warm welcome to yet another episode on the Mission Shunya podcast. I hope you're doing well. Thanks as always goes out to the special listeners who give a shout out to Mission Shunya across the social media channels. If you are one among them, a special thanks to you. I'm glad you like the podcast. A few appreciation posts are also coming for the cover arts for every episode. Well, thanks to Jacob and team from Terra Generation for that. They have been kind enough to do that in addition to their regular work as a content agency specialized in telling stories in climate, biodiversity and sustainability. You can connect with them for a chat at terrageneration.com. I am also getting a few topic suggestions. E-mobility seems to be a topic that a lot of you want more of. So yes, I'm working on it. Over the next couple of months, electric mobility will be a topic that you can definitely see coming up. Another topic is ESG, environmental, social and governance side of business. So yes, ESG is also something that will come up in the lineup pretty soon. But for now on this episode, let's get to a topic that is also hugely popular. Yes, as you heard in the intro, we are going to talk about waste. Well, when I first heard about UBQ Materials, it was interesting to know that they are from Israel. Israel over the last few decades has definitely produced a variety of successful startups. In fact, a book called Israel the Startup Nation is a good read if you want to know more about Israel's success in homegrown companies. UBQ offers an interesting and unique value proposition in turning waste into a valuable material. And as you would find out, I couldn't have found a better person to have a chat with on this story. So without further ado, let's welcome our guest, who is...
Hi, I'm Rachel Barr, Vice President of Sustainability at UBQ Materials and Climate Change Economist.
So Rachel, let's begin with the origin story of UBQ Materials. So how did this company come about and how did you get involved in the start?
UBQ came out of a problem that was observed in the food space by a man, a rabbi actually, who was interested in addressing the food waste that he saw coming out of his hummus factories, of all things.
Okay.
And he thought, we've got to do better. There has to be a solution. And so for about 7 years, he worked with some other people who are our founders, some scientists out of academia, and slowly but surely, from what came from my idea of taking trash that includes the organics, that they could make something into it. They shouldn't just have to incinerate or landfill trash. After lots and lots and lots of hours and sweat and tears and money, they came up with a solution that would work as a plastic substitute, and that is called UBQ Materials. And I got involved just as the company was coming out of stealth mode. So it was in stealth mode for around 7 years. Mm-hmm. And when they started saying, okay, well, we're ready to announce that we're here, we have a product that we can bring to market that's ready for the industry. Well, we need to have somebody who can head up our sustainability efforts that bridges a couple different worlds. One, I had to be able to speak to the I had to be able to speak to the business world, right? Our partners are
Correct.
are big companies. The other is I had to be able to speak the words of sustainability, not just in theory, but in practice. And that required a deep, deep academic knowledge, as well as functional utility of that knowledge. And the third is I had to be able to work within a business setting. And that was frankly the biggest leap because I was coming from Harvard, where I'd been in academia for many, many years. And I had very limited experience in a non-academic setting or a business setting that was outside of our family's efforts. We have a family business. So that's how I got to UBQ. And I was looking for a company that would provide what I thought a solution that was bankable, that was needed, and that could scale and at scale whose impact had the potential to be larger than many nation states' environmental footprints. And UBQ fit the bill. And I frankly have not seen any company to date that has the potential to change the world as much as UBQ does.
That's wonderful. I mean, two stories, and one, your personal story is also as interesting as UBQ's story. Firstly, when I read about UBQ and the origin story on the net, I found it very interesting. But generally, now we have got used to this trend where we see a lot of interesting, innovative companies coming out of Israel. Was that a major factor for you to move from Harvard to this region?
I had been visiting actually Israel when a friend of a friend mentioned that she was starting at UBQ.
Okay.
What turned out to be here is an amazing ecosystem. Israel is great at innovation. And once the climate crisis became better known, the country started looking towards solutions in that space. And now there are around 700 climate tech startups here in Israel alone.
Wow.
This is a small country. We're the size of New Jersey, maybe 10 million people. I'm in a city, the biggest city in Israel. It's called Tel Aviv, and it's 400,000 people. And yet they have this incredible ecosystem. I would not have made Aliyah, the process of immigrating to Israel, had it not been for UBQ. And I think I plan to be part of this ecosystem for a long time to come. I want to see UBQ realize its potential. But we're lucky to be at the very, very top echelon of companies within the climate tech space. And that's a really big honor and a huge opportunity.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting about the story of Israel and the number of companies that are there doing this. Now, getting back to the origin stories. Now, what you claim as a USP or the value differentiator is what you call the UBQ material. So, I know you can't reveal a lot about the technology and things, but in short, what is it really? And can you share some non-confidential information about the product?
I can, but let's also talk about what makes it so novel.
Okay.
We're taking trash, like the trash that you have at your house, the trash that I have at my house, which is mixed trash.
Correct.
It's plastic that can't be recycled. It's organics, the chicken bones, the garden waste, everything that comes in household trash. We take that unsorted household trash. The only things that we take out of that are things that can be recycled. We don't have to, but we choose to do. So the glass and the metal and the plastics that can be recycled, we remove. And then with the material that remains, which in Israel would only go to landfill, and these are unmanaged landfills, so they have huge impacts in terms of climate change, and I can go into that later. We apply very little heat, but it's a series of steps that are confidential, but there is a patent available that anyone who's interested and has the academic background to understand what's being said, which frankly, I do not. I'm an economist, but there is patents around UBQ material and how it's unique. We apply pressure and heat at very low levels in a series of steps that results in the end with a material that's just made out of this trash, but it's entirely different in its properties. And it's so different because when these conversions happen, the organics, and the plastics, they are brought to their primary elements. And as a result, the organics act as a matrix upon which the different plastics that otherwise are phobic to each other, they're not friends. are able to bind to the organics. And in so doing, it creates a material that's entirely different than the feedstock that we take, and yet is also able to go as a plastic substitute, and not just in a single plastic family. It can go across many plastic families. So I didn't know very much about plastics, and I'm assuming that your audience doesn't either. But what I've learned about plastics is that plastic is very, very different from type to type. So when you look at the bottom of your of a Coca-Cola bottle, for instance, that's made out of plastic, or your detergent bottle, they will have different numbers under their bottom, indicating different types of recycling lines, basically. Well, UBQ, what's amazing about us is that we can actually go into polypropylene, polyethylene, polystyrene, PVC. Those are 4 different families that, in general, you cannot cross. You cannot work across them, but we can work with all of those and more, actually. We do so, though, importantly, and this is the thing that got me and inspired me to leave academia. We're doing so at a price point that is competitive with the material that we're substituting for. So if a ton of polypropylene goes for, let's say, $1,000, that's what we're selling UBQ for. We're not selling for an additional cost for the sustainability benefits, of which there are many. I've mentioned the recycled content already. I've alluded to more the carbon footprint benefits of UBQ. But most companies in this space, they are charging 3x what the prices of the conventional resin that they're substituting for.
That's very interesting when you mention, especially on the price front, that you're able to produce something that's very unique, that solves a problem, but also is competitive compared to the existing alternatives. Now, going back to the initial process, you did mention about segregating waste. I mean, that is the biggest challenge, right? Because coming from a developing world, I know sorting waste is the biggest challenge, especially when you ask people to discard waste. It tends to get mixed, the organic ones and the other sections. How have you overcome it? I assume maybe things are a little better in Israel, but how have you overcome? Are there any other converters or anything that's very unique that you have developed to sort the waste and then process it further?
We don't really sort the waste. What we remove before we consider our feedstock is things that can be recycled, because when we think of the waste hierarchy, we're very invested in advancing sustainability. So we shouldn't be making something into UBQ that can be recycled in a more primary element. So water bottles that we find in our feedstock are removed because you can readily recycle water bottles in Israel. Same thing with aluminum, glass as well. But literally, we could chop all this stuff up, the entire feedstock of the contents of my home trash, chop it up. And instead of putting it into landfill or incinerating it, which is the common way to deal with waste like this in the developed world, which would be to incinerate it, here in Israel, we actually just put it into landfill. And so we don't actually do anything to, quote, prepare the feedstock, except for the things that we do based on our values. We are, from inception, a sustainable company. So we are doing everything with sustainability in mind. So while we could do things that might be less expensive, like, for instance, not in our new factory do a capturing process for the steam that happens in our conversion process and make that into energy for the factory, that's very expensive to implement that. But it was a no-brainer for the company. I didn't even have to ask anyone to do it. It was done just like that. And it's because sustainability is within the heartbeat of this company. For the same reasons, we have basically the most advanced recycling facility in Israel, because Israel has such poor recycling here. And we remove things that can be recycled. We give those to partners for free. We don't make money off of that, which is, again, novel. We're just doing it because it's the right thing to do.
So you did mention about the price point, which is very competitive. Now, the other factor is about the size of the system and the timelines that it generally takes for you to process, say, 1 ton of waste and then get it to UBQ material. So what is the size that even the smallest factory can process, and what are the timelines, like from start to finish? What are those numbers like?
You asked about capacity for the factory as well as throughput, and both are critical if we're going to have an impact as a company on the world. We can't just be talking about a solution. We have to have scale.
Correct.
Per line at UBQ, we can output, I believe it's a ton per hour. And UBQ's process requires a line of steps. And so what happens at our current factory, which is rather small, around up to 5,000 tons a year, will be done along multiple lines in our next factory, which will be live in Bergen of Zoom. And that factory will have an annual capacity of around 80,000 tons per annum.
Wow.
And that's just the start. As a reference point, the 80,000 tons that will be pumped out by the UBQ factory will be able to process the annual household waste. This is my internal calculation of around 200,000 Dutch citizens.
Wow.
But this is, again, going to be a small factory. We are looking for massive solutions. And frankly, where the impact's going to be is going to be in the developing world, not the developed world.
True.
Because in the developing world, there are systems, but also in the developed world, there are systems for management, but also there's economies that are well developed for the plastic. And at first, we need to do things in a conventional way with established markets, but we all have our eyes towards the developing world. We understand that in India, in Bangladesh, in Africa, in Latin America, on the island nations, there's desperate need for solutions in the waste sector. And if we can leapfrog over the systems that don't work so well that we observe in countries like Germany and the Netherlands, and provide solutions, the UBQ solutions specifically, to the developing world, that's where the impact's going to be, because every ton of UBQ that is diverted from an unmanaged landfill, that's a landfill where just waste is dumped into it, it can prevent up to 11.7 tons of CO2 equivalent per ton of UBQ, as well as remove 1.3 tons of waste. And that the difference between the 1 ton of UBQ and the 1.3 tons of waste is just a function of moisture. But that moisture also holds volume. And so it's critical that we not have this stuff go to landfill.
Fair.
Especially if we're going to address the climate emergency. We have to do more soon to mitigate the impact of methane gas on the environment. And if landfills are filled with organic material, which is the primary portion of household waste, that converts in an anaerobic environment into methane. And it's a very, very powerful greenhouse gas.
Fair. I mean, that's a valid point. On two counts. One is landfill. Land is a resource, again, that is going to be wasted because of this. And again, methane emissions is another thing that climate scientists are now taking seriously. And we had the methane pledge come up recently. So all this adds up to the climate positivity of the process, the entire process. But your overall approach is also what you call climate positive. I think it's a zero discharge site. How do you ensure the circular economy aspect of your business and your process in this?
It's a really important question, circularity, because just taking waste that would otherwise go to landfill and making it into material, if that material then goes into a product and then ends up in a landfill a year later, what benefit does that do?
Correct.
I don't think the benefit is very high compared to what it could be if you could then circle that waste back and make it into something new. So here's what UBQ does that's really impressive. UBQ is made from 100% post-consumer waste.
Okay.
That is incredible to begin with. And yet we can replace conventional plastics. However, when a product made with plastic right now is recycled, every time it's recycled with a fossil fuel-based resin, the bonds that hold together the plastic little by little break down. So the first time you make a material with a plastic, it's great, it's solid, dependable, it behaves the way it should be. You recycle that. You cut it down, you put it through the conversion process, you remake it into pellets, and then you make those pellets into the thing again. Well, unless you cut that product with new virgin resin, it does not perform the same way. And every time you recycle a product, the technical properties of it fade. We have not published this information yet, but we're working on getting third-party verification for what we know internally through our own testing, is that when we run recycling again and again of products that are being made with UBQ inside of it, not entirely UBQ, a portion of UBQ and a portion of a conventional fossil fuel-based resin, what we're seeing is that there is not a massive decay of the technical properties, not just once, not just twice. We did it 10 times, and we're not seeing massive changes in technical properties, which means it's an incredible value proposition for the plastics industry. It's going to change the entire way that plastic industry looks at recycling. The question is not, can your product be recycled? Can your plastic be recycled? The question is, how many times can that plastic be recycled?
Fair.
And so in this way, circularity is, I would say, the most exciting short-term solution that UBQ can provide.
Wonderful.
Because for the long-term impact on the climate, we need to scale up factories in the developing world. But today, immediately, with every ton of UBQ that goes out, we're able to reduce the need for conventional plastics and extend the life of the products that are being made, because when that goes for recycling conventionally, products made with UBQ can be recycled conventionally. We're not seeing the technical decay of those recycled materials as a result. That is paradigm breaking.
That's interesting. Now, the entire process, I'm sure when you got started in Israel, I mean, to an extent, there was some bit of ecosystem support. Like, who are the partners generally that you look forward when you set up a system like this? You did mention that you're going to the Netherlands and setting it up there. So who are the partners you generally want to work with in new markets?
We generally do something unusual than other companies in the climate space, or even the waste tech space. Most companies look towards the government for assistance. Now, we take household trash. So you could think, UBQ must partner with the city.
Correct.
And the city then says, we're going to give you the trash. And the city is really the client. The city's going to pay us to take the trash. Well, here in Israel, for example, we don't receive any money from the city for taking the trash.
Okay.
Or from the government. We don't have any, that's called tipping fees. We don't receive money for the tipping fees. We actually pay a little bit to have it transported. Not too much, because the place where the waste would go is actually like 3 kilometers from where we are as a factory. But nonetheless, we pay a little bit.
Okay.
What's amazing about UBQ is that we're looking for partners who will buy our product, because the only way that a company can be truly sustainable is if you're financially viable and you create a product that can go to market, that is good enough that people are willing to buy it without it being a pain to implement. And UBQ meets that criteria. So what we're looking for are large partners. And that's what we've done. We've partnered with large OEMs, car companies like Mercedes and PepsiCo, and McDonald's has UBQ in some of their trays, for instance. And these are R&D partnerships, but the goal is to scale them up. And when you're talking at scale, you can be talking about hundreds of thousands of tons a year, especially if you're looking at partners in the built space. In my estimation, where the big impact of UBQ will not be in UBQ inside of Mercedes vehicles, which is already happening, because it's not enough tons. We need tons. Look at the trash that each of us puts out every day. So much waste. We need a place to put that waste. The place in our econosphere is the built space, in my estimation. It's in bricks. It's in flooring. It's in siding. It's in pipes. It's everywhere. Anything that has mass. And our built space has mass. So I believe long term, our major partners will be co-located next to us, and we'll be offloading our materials to them. We're already seeing that happen. I'm not at liberty to say sort of who those main partners are, but I'd be remiss to say also that we do have investors, and those investors are absolutely partners with us, because you can't say we're going to build a factory in another country, especially because a factory like ours costs a lot of money to make, without investors up front. And so we have been very fortunate with family investors, and our CEO owns a majority of the company. And he comes from a plastic family. And so we also have, though, importantly, a company that's called TPG. And this is
from US?
From the US, exactly. A very, very large impact investment organization. And it's where people like Bono invest in, so that if they want to have a huge impact with their money on the environment. And they've been an incredible partner of ours as well.
That's good to know that you have like some really big names backing you up. And the other part that you mentioned about the customers as your partners is also very interesting, because a lot of large players, like you mentioned, they have their own sustainability targets in terms of having sustainable materials in their products. So I'm sure there's a perfect fit for them to be co-located with your facilities.
That's right. We want to reduce the price of transporting our material to the people who are using it. Of course, government is a critical part, right? The Netherlands makes it very easy by reducing barriers to build. Mm-hmm. They handle a lot of red tape and things can go faster. And that's why we chose the specific area where we're going, which is called Bergen op Zoom in the Netherlands, because they do reduce barriers for deploying a factory rapidly that's sustainable in its mindset and its output. But this is intended to be everywhere in the world as quickly as possible. The first few factories will roll out slower, but then we're talking about really massive amounts of material being processed.
Well, that leads me perfectly to the final question. Now, you didn't mention government support in getting it rolled out in the Netherlands. But as you have said multiple times in the conversation, that we all know that that's a global problem. Plastics is a global problem and waste management is a bigger problem. But you have a right product or a unique one. But in addition to being slow in the early years, I'm sure you would have some ideas to scale it up to other regions. So what are your initial thoughts, especially in the developing world? How do you plan to take it there?
It's a great question, but you're talking, for better or for worse, to the Vice President of Sustainability at UBQ Materials. That is a business development question. That's a CEO level question. And I very modestly stay in my lane. I will say this. I am part of the delegation that goes to the climate negotiations every year on behalf of Israel. I focus exclusively on the methane pledge. And while there, I am speaking to the three main industries that drive methane emissions. One of them is waste. And I talk to nations from around the world about this topic. We are incredibly bullish on deploying this as quickly as possible. What the model looks like from a business perspective is something that I'm not at liberty to talk about at this time, but I would say we are not joking around. I would not be here if this company didn't have the intention of having an impact that exceeds that of most nation states on this space. It's going to be something to really behold, and I'm very proud to be a part of it today and in the future. And I hope to be here when we have 200 factories. I don't want to go anywhere. This is my dream job because I'm at a company that not only has the right values in place, the right people in place, but they also have the right partners in place. And that'll continue happening on an ongoing basis.
Wonderful. Rachel, it's been an absolute pleasure having this conversation with you. And you are a true sustainability leader. And I'm sure when you scale up to so many factories, maybe we'll get a chance to again discuss this topic. And maybe we'll again revisit this conversation and we'll have more interesting insights from your perspectives of moving into new markets, especially the developing world. I'm very curious about that part. So it's been a pleasure. And thank you for taking time to join me on the podcast today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. And I look forward to talking to you again.
Wonderful. So that was a wrap on yet another interesting conversation. UBQ is short for ubiquitous, which signifies their solution being ubiquitous to the waste problem. Rachel was a perfect person to talk about the sustainability side of their business. They are definitely expanding around the world. You can follow their updates. I will share the links in the description of this episode. If you have any feedback, missionchunya@gmail.com is the ID. I will be back in 2 weeks' time with yet another interesting conversation. Until then, this is Girish Shivakumar signing off. And as always, thank you for listening.